And now we're getting to the point in time in our story where things take a very drastic turn for the worse. This right here was the start to arguably the worst domino effect you're ever going to see. Nearly 20 years ago, there was a man who was taking over the college football world by storm. What he was doing was nothing short of remarkable, and looking back at it now with the perspective we have, I think it was utterly ridiculous. This guy was supposed to be a nobody that was playing on an average team that wasn't supposed to make any noise whatsoever. And what did he wind up doing? Oh, you know, nothing short than become one of the best college football quarterbacks in the history of the sport. He wound up breaking the single season passing touchdowns record and had 58, count them, 58 touchdowns in one season. And oh yeah, can't forget to mention and throw this in there. He wasn't just putting up all these insane numbers and stats and meaningless efforts. His team was undefeated in the regular season. Many people thought he was going to go on to have an extremely successful NFL career, but unfortunately that didn't happen because in 2010 he got in a very bad car wreck. This car wreck was gasoline to the fire, and it was a domino effect from then on out. Let me get that out there right now. This is for educational purposes only, YouTube, so let's get that straight. Anyways though, like I was saying, before the car wreck, he couldn't sleep at night, so he tried taking over-the-counter medications. Well, after the car wreck, he was diagnosed with a quote-unquote traumatic brain injury. This then ultimately led to him making some impulse decisions and some bad decisions at that. And I know what all you're sitting there saying, well, Matt, what kind of decisions are we talking about here? And well, there's not really an easy way to come out and say this. One of the decisions he made, it wound up costing his life. And there's a lot of questions people have about this guy that have been floating around even till this day, but it all circles back to the one big question we're going to try to get to the bottom of in today's video. What really happened to Colt Brennan? Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, hope all of you having a great day. If not, hope this video can make it a little bit better. And major shout out to Christian Rocker. You can thank him in the comment section down below because he's the reason we're making this video. He recommended it and I said, hey, you know what? I think that's a great idea. And I know I said it in the intro, but I'm going to say it again. This is your warning and disclaimer. This video, it may be a little, what's the word I'm looking for here? It may be a little gut-wrenching. We'll go with that word for some people tuning in. Me personally, I don't think it's that bad, but, you know, some people might, so I just want to give you a little warning. And YouTube doesn't like when you talk about touchy subjects either, so YouTube, calm down. This is an informative and educational video. That's all. As always, if you have a recommendation on a story you want to see on a certain player situation, drop a comment down below and there's a great chance we might make that video. So yeah, that's all I got for y'all. If you do like videos like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Helps us out tremendously. Strap in, buckle up, get you a popcorn, get you a snack, get your favorite meal you like to eat when you watch a video, because trust me, I do the same thing. But all right, Matt, blah, 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 shut the crap up. Without further ado, let's get into it. Man, oh man, good old Colt Brennan. That is a name I haven't heard of in quite some time, and it also takes us back into a time where life was just completely different. When Colt Brennan was playing college football, there wasn't social media, so now that I think about it, this is one of the older stories we've ever done on the channel. Things were just different back then, and to get into Colt Brennan's hectic, and I mean absolutely hectic story, we gotta throw it all the way back to where things started. And this right here goes to prove how old this story is. When Colt Brennan was in high school, there wasn't 24/7 sports recruiting rankings or ESPN. When he was in high school, guess who was the only place who had recruit rankings? Rivals.com. And according to Rivals, he was only a 2-star recruit. And you want to take a guess at how many big-time schools offered him? 0. He had 0 total offers coming out of high school. He had some interest from schools like Montana, Oregon, San Diego State, Utah State, and Washington, but none of them gave him an offer. It is worth mentioning, though, that he did attend Mater Dei High School, where he was the backup to, guess who? This is a name you should be familiar with. Matt Leinart. So whenever Matt Leinart, he graduated from Mater Dei, that is when Colt Brennan, he took over the reins. But with Colt Brennan not being a highly regarded athlete, he wound up deciding to have a postgraduate season. And this is where he attended, I believe I'm saying this correctly, Worcester Academy in Massachusetts. I know some people may not know what this means, so I'll break it down. It's relatively simple. A postgraduate year after high school means you're just getting ready for the college level without going there quite just yet. Back then, you didn't see it as often, but now you see it all the time. It's pretty much for guys that weren't recruited heavy and they go there, they can develop more and then potentially get some more offers. And that's what Colt Brennan did, and it wound up working out because he walked on at Colorado. But ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is where the water in our story, it already starts to get murky. While Colt Brennan was at Colorado, he entered a dorm room of a female student and allegedly and apparently exposed himself to her. Yeah, I know we didn't ease into that and that was really abrupt and you're sitting there going, Matt, Where in the crap is this story going? But just hear me out, calm down. Obviously, it goes without being said, big no, can't do that. And at the time, Brennan, it was announced that he was heavily intoxicated and he was arrested. But to make a long story short here, because when I was doing my research and all this, there's still a lot of question marks I have, but I digress. Brennan was only charged with burglary and trespassing. That's it. And he served 7 days in jail and was put on probation for 4 years or until he graduated college. The verdict did say he was not guilty for quote-unquote unlawful sexual contact because of lack of evidence. For that one thing, it came down to a he said, she said. The girl, she couldn't prove anything and he was denying everything. And Brennan was actually ordered by the court to take a polygraph test about the incident and he wound up passing it. But here was the problem with all this at the time. Back in 2004 when this took place, exactly 20 years ago. You can chop it up to a coincidence if you want, do what you please with the information I present to you, but Colt Brennan at the time, he was not the only Hawaii player that was involved in some sexual conduct that was going on. Back then, there's a lot of allegations going on with this Colorado football team involving some sexual stuff. And even though it wasn't all too bad for Colt Brennan, considering the circumstances, it could have been way worse, you know how that goes. Colorado still kicked him off of the team. And here's what Brennan had to say about the whole incident, quote unquote. I made a mistake that night, but it's such a complicated situation. What I learned about myself was I am still a good person. Did I make a mistake? I definitely made a mistake. Before this happened, I was a good kid and never had been suspended from school and never had been in trouble. That's why I think I got into that situation. I took things for granted. Now, we could sit up here for the next 5, 6, 7 minutes and debate whether or not what he did was bad, but I think we're on the same boat here. Wasn't a good look, and there's no excusing it. I will say this, though. Breaking into a girl's dorm room, whether you expose yourself or not, yeah, there's no excusing that. And I was looking at some other articles and everybody was saying, well, he was heavily intoxicated. He didn't know what he was doing. He doesn't even remember it. Granted, that may be true. He might have been drunk, but it doesn't excuse it. Same thing for Henry Ruggs. I'm not getting into the whole Henry Ruggs situation. If you know, you know. We'll leave it at this. Very bad look, very bad situation, but fortunately enough for Colt Brennan, he got a second chance. Colt Brennan, with not many options available, he winds up transferring to a JUCO college that goes by the name of Saddleback College in California. And this is where he helped lead his team to a conference championship and was State Offensive Player of the Year. And this is where the situation at Colorado, it comes back to bite him in the butt. A lot of teams were looking at him hard when he was playing for this JUCO school, but due to the whole situation and the jail time he had to serve at Colorado, they wound up backing off and they didn't recruit him as hard. And here's something I thought was really interesting. Originally, he had 2 offers after that JUCO season from Syracuse and San Jose State. But literally, the day the Syracuse paperwork officially arrived at Colt Brennan's home, the head coach called him to tell him the school's president wouldn't allow it. The reason he wouldn't allow it? Relatively simple. Because he looked up his history and said, oh, yep, we can't have that guy coming to our program. And the thing that was really crazy about all this is Colt Brennan really wanted to go to Syracuse, but they had to pull the offer. Meanwhile, though, Hawaii's head coach, June Jones, he didn't offer him a scholarship, but instead he offered him a chance to be a walk-on. And in return, June Jones, yet again, head coach of Hawaii, told him, if you pay your way while you walk on, I promise I'll make you an NFL quarterback. And I thought this was really cool. Here was the last thing that June Jones told him before he made his decision. You can go to San Jose State and you might get drafted, but if you make this sacrifice and come to Hawaii, I'll take care of you eventually, and you'll be one of the first quarterbacks drafted. If you don't realize the opportunity, you're not the man I thought you were, and I don't want you here. Oh, what about that? A little reverse psychology. I like it. It's human nature to want to prove somebody wrong, and that's what this Hawaii head coach was trying to get Colt Brennan to do by basically telling him, hey, if you don't come here, I guess you're not the man I thought you were. And I don't want to make it seem like this was an easy decision for Colt Brennan because it was not. You got to think about the situation at hand here, guys. Hawaii did not offer him a scholarship. They allowed him to walk on. He was going to have to pay his way to go to school there. Meanwhile, San Jose State gave him a full ride. I can't even begin to imagine how hard the decision was, but Colt Brennan decided, you know what? I'm up for the challenge. I'm taking my talents to Hawaii. And this is where our story really starts to get good. I'm going to remind some of y'all, we're not going to spend too much time talking about him, but before Colt Brennan came in, Hawaii had a quarterback that went by the name of Timmy Chang, and at the time, people that were Hawaii fans thought, hey, this is about as good as it gets. Timmy Chang was really that dude, and at the time, it was like, all right, we got to cherish and relish him as much as we can, because we're not going to get another guy who's even close to him. Well, come to find out, Colt Brennan, at least in my humble opinion, was better than Timmy Chang. As far as it goes for the Hawaii football program, they went on a heck of a little run there. Colt Brennan winds up enrolling at Hawaii shortly after the 2004 season, and in 2005, he started 10 of 12 games. And I thought this was really insightful, gives you a great perspective of how things are at Hawaii. Here's what Brennan had to say about the lifestyle there. It just slowed everything down for me. They focus on just enjoying things and being happy. When I grew up in Southern California, everybody was worried about being the man and having the nice car and all the cash and the girls. Out there, it's about who's the coolest guy and being laid back. It's all about what type of person you are and what kind of character you have. I can't tell you enough how much I love that, because in society nowadays, we're just caught up in all the wrong things. Success is different to everybody, but for me personally, I value success on happiness. And I'm not trying to sit up here and say you're a terrible person if you like fast cars, big houses, and money, because I like those things too. But to attest to Colt Brennan's point here, in certain cultures like Hawaii's, it's not that important. What's important is just being a good person and chilling and relaxing. As I've gotten older and matured a little bit, I've come to find out that this life, it goes by fast, and sometimes you just gotta kick back and enjoy the ride. And let me tell you what, Colt Brennan, he was enjoying the Rainbow Express. If you don't know what I mean by that, Hawaii, they're called the Rainbow Warriors, so there you go, there's you some context. In that first year for Hawaii in 2005, Colt Brennan, pretty good, pretty dang good to say the least. Completed right at 68% of his passes, had over 4,300 passing yards with 35 touchdowns to 13 INTs. Now the 13 interceptions may concern some of you, but that was Hawaii's play style back then, and he still had a touchdown to interception ratio of roughly 3-1. And Hawaii was decent in 2005, but 2006, that was the breakout season. Nobody after that 2005 season even knew Colt Brennan's name outside of the state, but in 2006, everybody's like, wait a minute, hold on. What's going on over here? And the reason people are saying that is because, well, I'll just let you take a look at these numbers for yourself. Yet again, this is 20 years ago. Completed, rounding up here, 73% of his passes. Had over 5,500 passing yards, 58! This isn't his career, 1 year. 58 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. I don't even know what to say about that. Well, actually, I do know what to say about that. Video game numbers. That 2006 season for Hawaii, and more specifically here, Colt Brennan, it was unreal. And the crazy part about this is I have never said a guy who had 12 interceptions in 1 year had an unreal season, but he did. You can overlook those 12 interceptions easily because he had 58 touchdowns. Don't get me wrong, it's not the prettiest touchdown to interception ratio you're going to see, but it just didn't matter. I can't emphasize this enough. That is how Colt Brennan played. He was a gunslinger, and he fit the Hawaii system perfectly. When I was gathering all my research for this video, I was watching some film on him, and unfortunately I can't show him the film because NCAA, they have strict copyright rules. But he is the only guy I've seen in a long time to throw an interception, come out there in the next drive, and throw a 50-yard bomb that also could have been intercepted. He doesn't want to check it down and get back in a rhythm. No, he's out there. He's throwing like the interception never happened. He's playing like you're in the backyard with your boys. And don't even get me started on the accuracy through the roof. Considering how many pass attempts he was throwing per game, he still completed 73% of his passes. You're just not going to see that again. And I don't mean this as disrespect, but he was doing it with inferior talent and not that great of an offensive line. He had some weapons, don't get me wrong, but it was nothing too crazy. His 58 passing touchdowns that season, it was an NCAA record, but recently it did get broken. And also in that 2006 season, he finished 6th in Heisman voting. He broke so many school records, and here's what his head coach at the time had to say about everything. I don't care what you say, there's no quarterback as talented and playing like he's playing right now. I wouldn't trade him for anyone else in the country. I don't care what people say. No quarterback has played like he has. Although things were going great the past couple of years, he did have another tricky situation on his hands, but it was a good tricky situation. He had a big decision to make. Do I leave and go to the NFL now, or do I come back for another year, develop a little bit more, and improve my draft stock? Unfortunately, with this dating back all the way to 2006, there wasn't all this mock draft hype like there is now. But however, I did see a couple reports stating that if he would have declared for the draft after that magical 2006 season, he would have been a second-round pick. I also saw some people saying he would have been a late first-round pick at best, and he might have fell to the 3rd or 4th round. I am going to remind you, though, that's all subjective, and that doesn't mean anything was set in stone. That right there is a whole mystery itself, but in reality, it doesn't matter too much because he decided that he wasn't ready, and he's coming back for another season in 2007. There was also a wild notion that he just loved Hawaii, loved the culture, loved the fan base, and he came back for them. Of course, hindsight's 20/20, but looking back on it, I don't think if he would have left after 2006 or 2007, it would have affected his draft stock too much. Because in 2007, although he wasn't as good as he was in 2006 on paper, he was still an outstanding quarterback. Still had the gunslinger mentality, completed 70% of his passes, had 4,300 passing yards, with 38 touchdowns, huge drop off there, and 17 interceptions. And I get it, I know what everybody's about to write in the comment section. Matt, 17 interceptions? That's crazy. But I disagree. To me, at least, there's not really a huge difference in 12 interceptions and 17 interceptions. We knew Colt Brennan was like this. This is who he is. And here's why I say who cares about the interceptions, because in 2007, although his numbers were down, they didn't lose a game. They were 12-0 in the regular season. They did go to the Sugar Bowl and play Georgia, in which they got stomped, but that's just due to the fact that Georgia, they just had way too much talent up front. I remember watching that game. Colt Brennan was on the ground every single play. And in that game, Colt Brennan did have 3 interceptions, so not a good way to end his career. With this being his last year at Hawaii, although it didn't end the way he wanted it with 3 interceptions, still, all in all, when you look at his career, remarkable, that's the word I'm going to use. This guy was living the dream. Not only was he a star quarterback, but he was living in Hawaii. It doesn't get too much better than that. However, these NFL teams and GMs, they didn't exactly view him as a franchise quarterback. And in all fairness here, I can't blame him, because it's hard to exactly know how good a quarterback for Hawaii actually is. Because remember, in his last final college career game against Georgia, he had 0 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Like I said, though, not all of that was on him, though, because his offensive line didn't amount to a hill of beans compared to Georgia's front 7 on defense, but the bottom line is, he was a question mark. It is just so hard to evaluate a guy that wasn't playing up against top-notch competition. And for that reason alone, and I think that was the only reason, he wound up falling all the way down to the 6th round, and he got selected with the 186th overall pick by the Redskins. Don't cancel me, because at the time, that's what they were called, the Washington Redskins. So calm down, buddy, calm down. Now they're the Commanders. At the time, though, they were the Redskins, and they wound up signing him to a 4-year deal for $1.8 million. And he wound up playing a little bit in the preseason, and his numbers were really solid in the preseason at that. In the Hall of Fame game against the Colts in 2008, he went 9 of 10, had 123 yards and 2 touchdowns. It doesn't get too much better than that. A couple weeks later against the Jets, he went 4 of 5 with 79 yards and threw the game-winning touchdown. And out of all the rookies in the 2008 preseason, he led them in touchdowns, passing yards, and QBR. And most importantly, he had 0 interceptions. Remember, some people say, oh, that was a red flag out of Hawaii, but he didn't have any in the preseason. But, and I have a really big but, we all know this, even if you do really good in the preseason, these GMs and executives and coaches, they're going to chalk it up to, oh, well, that's the preseason. And it's why I say the preseason doesn't matter too much if you do really good or really bad, because you're probably not going to play either way if you're the backup or third string quarterback, and that's what happened here. Washington didn't even give him a shot to the slice of bits, and in 2009, he was placed on the injury reserve list. And sadly, this hip injury and hamstring injury he had in 2009, it ended his season. And with Washington not having a use for him whatsoever, on August 2nd of 2010, they released him. Doesn't end there, though, because only 5 days later, on August 7th in 2020, Brennan wound up signing with the Oakland Raiders. This was all for nothing, though, because only a month later, they wound up cutting him. And now we're getting to the point in time in our story where things take a very drastic turn for the worse. This right here was the start to arguably the worst domino effect you're ever going to see. A few months later, in November, after he was cut by the Oakland Raiders, he was in a serious car wreck. This car wreck was so bad it wound up leaving him with TBI, which is a traumatic brain injury, broken ribs, and a collarbone. The broken ribs and collarbone, yeah, it sucks, but those are going to heal with time. The brain injury is what caused a lot of concerns. And this goes to show you how bad the wreck was. He was out of the loop for, according to him, 6 to 7 days. Here's what Colt Brennan stated, quote unquote, "All I know is I woke up 6, 7 days later, and I was, and I still am, a different person. I suffered minor TBI, traumatic brain injury. I just have a small scar, on my brain, but it's in an area that makes you impulse and emotional. I've had to learn how to control that." It was also stated by his sister after the car wreck, he was diagnosed with severe depression and insomnia. According to Colt Brennan's father in multiple different interviews I saw him do, his son, to combat the insomnia and depression and everything else he was dealing with mentally, he was trying over-the-counter medications, and it just advanced from there. And when I say it advanced from there, I think you know what I'm trying to say without me actually saying it. He was trying to find something stronger. Because the human body, after you start taking, let's just say, Advil, well, you take it for a week or two, he gets used to it, and then he needs something else. And let me remind you, we're still in the time frame of 2010, right after the car wreck. And while he's dealing with all these problems and just mentally trying to get back on the right track here, he's also trying to get back on the right track physically and play football. And in June of 2011, he wound up signing not with an NFL team, but a team out of the UFL, the United Football League, that goes by the name of the Hartford Colonials. And there's not too much to say there because the league wound up suspending operations shortly after he tried getting into it. But that's not the end of it. He kept on pursuing this dream of playing football. And in February of 2012, he wound up signing with the Saskatchewan Roughriders of the Canadian Football League. You know what? Hold on. I hate to have this brief interruption here in our story, but it seems like every story video we do, this is the last resort. This is like last chance you. Saskatchewan Roughriders of the Canadian Football League. Why does everybody join them? I have no idea, but let's continue along here. Joins them in February 2012, and he was expected to be the backup quarterback, but they wound up bringing in another backup quarterback that beat him out for the job, and Brennan was released in that summer of 2012. So at this point in time in our story, things are really, and I mean really bad. Not only can he not even stay in the NFL, but he can't even stay in the Canadian Football League. That right there is the darkest of depths, when you're getting released by the CFL. And I don't think you got to be a rocket scientist to figure out this was hard for him mentally. And it took a toll on him because only about a month later, in July of 2012, he got arrested for a DUI. Not a good look whatsoever, and it was stated by multiple different sources at this point in time in his life, this is when he started to become an alcoholic. You hate to see it, you really do, but another football team wound up giving him a chance, and this was an arena football team that goes by the name of the Los Angeles Kiss. They signed him, and just like everybody else that signed him, they cut him shortly after, only a few months later. Here's another thing that's rather interesting, and I think it goes to prove just how messed up he was mentally at this point in time in his life. In 2015, there was an incident where Colt Brennan wound up filing a police report that his vehicle was stolen. I know what you're sitting there saying, okay, Matt, why are we talking about this? No big deal. Somebody stole his car, he filed a report. And yeah, you're 100% right, I agree, but that's not what happened. The problem with Colt Brennan filing a police report that somebody stole his car is that nobody stole his car. And somehow, some way, his attorney wound up bailing him out of the situation. I don't know if he had Saul Goodman working for him or what was going on, but he said, his attorney, by the way, stated that his memory was the reason he filed that report, and it was stemming from the 2010 car crash. And that whole situation's complicated itself. To make a long story short, the charges, they were dropped on him for filing that false police report. And by this point in time in his life, around 2015, 2016, 2017, many people surrounding him thought he had CTE. A few years go by, fast forward in time all the way into 2019, which is only about 5 years ago, he was arrested yet again for driving a vehicle under the influence. And what happens next? It's almost like deja vu. It is beyond wild. Fast forward time into 2020, Colt Brennan was arrested again for trespassing and refusing to leave a hotel. Oh yeah, I got to throw in there as well. He was also, quote unquote, heavily intoxicated. Now you're probably sitting here thinking to yourself, where have I heard a story like this before? And it's in the same story we're talking about right now in the same video. Remember way back in the beginning of his story? He got arrested for this, but doing it on a college campus. Remember, he broke into a girl's dorm room, exposed himself, and he got off the hook. He's got Saul Goodman as a lawyer. He spent 7 days in jail. That's it. And he still got to have a very outstanding college football career. Well, fast forward in time to nearly 15 years later, same incident. He's trespassing in a hotel, he refused to leave, and he's heavily intoxicated. He wound up getting charged with second-degree trespassing, spent a few nights in jail, and they actually wound up letting him out due to a lawyer's request for court-supervised release without bail. By this point in time in our story, if you haven't figured it out by now, football for Colt Brennan, it is an afterthought. He has some serious and real deal mental problems, and he's going to be lucky if he can just stay out of jail. And while he's going through all of this, his family, they're trying the best to help him out. But at the end of the day, and even his father stated this, he's got to want it for himself. He's got to help himself out. We can only do so much. Continuing along, though, here in our story, in May of 2021, a bad thing happened. His parents wound up returning home from a trip they took to Mexico, and when they got home, they found their son, Colt Brennan, drunk and high in their home. In other terms here, he relapsed, and according to his parents, he was surrounded by bottles of vodka, cans of beer, and canisters of nitrous oxide, one of his primary drugs of choice. His parents drove him to Hoag Hospital in Newport Beach, where he was told they were keeping Colt in an emergency room until he was able to enter detox. Instead of that actually happening, Hoag, the hospital, released Colt Brennan around 1 a.m. that night, in which Colt Brennan wound up making his way to a nearby motel. He apparently met some men who delivered him drugs. And at around 4 a.m. that same night, he, how do I say this here? He OD'd. The autopsy revealed it was effects of ethanol, methamphetamines, and fentanyl. Is that how you say it? Fentanyl? Yeah, something like that. You get what I'm trying to say. And before we go any farther, I want to say RIP to Colt Brennan. I know he made a lot of bad decisions and choices, but I try to remember people for the good in this life. If you want to criticize him in the comment section, you have every right to do so. I'm just not going to do that here. Here's the thing, though, and I want to make this clear. Everybody that knew Colt Brennan and was around him for the past 6 or 7 years, it was almost inevitable that this was going to happen. And unfortunately, it happened, but here is the next question his parents were asking. Okay, yeah, we know he was addicted to all these drugs, but why was he? Why did his brain crave it so much? So the Brennans decided to donate his brain to Boston University CTE Center. And Dr. Ann McKee said it was harder than usual for them to examine the brain due to the nature of Colt's death. Since the drug overdose rendered Colt's unconsciousness and unable, or I guess you should say inability to breathe for long enough that his entire brain looked as though it had suffered a gigantic stroke, he lost a lot of tissue that interfered somewhat with McKee's examination. And I'm just touching on the high points here. There's a lot of nerdy stuff they say that I don't even think people like me and you, we'd understand. But it is worth throwing this in there. It was stated he also suffered a loss of tissue in his right frontal lobe that essentially left a hole there due to a substantial loss of tissue caused by the 2010 car accident. And although it was difficult to assess his brain and the extent of the injuries, it was stated that Colt's brain did show signs of CTE. And I do want to touch on this because I know what some of you may be sitting there saying. It's the same thing I say. Oh, well, just don't do drugs. Don't do them. Tell your brain, hey, I'm not doing that stuff. And if you have that perspective, I don't blame you, but it's a naive perspective, and I'll explain why. Colt Brennan suffered brain damage to the point where he couldn't override it, if that makes sense. So for me, I'll give you an example. I love me some chocolate chip cookies. And right now, if I saw a chocolate chip cookie in front of me, my brain would tell me, hey, let's eat that cookie, but I could override the system and say, you know what, I'm on a diet. I'm not eating that cookie. Colt Brennan couldn't do that. And remember, way back in our video, he even stated himself that due to the car wreck, he had impulse decision making. And here's what the doctor also stated, quote unquote, his ability to avoid those things was really diminished. He's got impulses that he can't control. He's got urges that are physical in nature. There's a physical aspect to this. It's not just will and fortitude and discipline. He's got injuries that he's trying to overcome. It was also stated, quote unquote, with that much damage there, it just made it that much harder for him to become sober and sustain that sobriety, which is just heartbreaking. And this is the last quote I'm going to show you, but it's arguably the best one. He was really working uphill. He had a pretty limited toolkit given everything he had been through with the car accident, the damage to his brain, and addiction in and of itself, without all the other medical issues, not to mention his fall from grace. It's really difficult for people, the self-esteem collapse that comes from that. That right there is something I want to touch on, because your average Joe Schmoes out here walking around, they don't get it. The mental battle you go through when you was the top athlete, when you was a top dog, to then being a guy that nobody wants on their roster and you're just a regular person, is something that most people will never relate to. And it's depressing, and it's a main reason a lot of these 4- and 5-star recruits, they crash out at the end. And I'm not even just talking about Colt Brennan's case, I'm talking about in general. Our last story, for example, we did on Christian Hackenberg. That guy was rated not just as a 5-star recruit, but the #1 quarterback in the nation and the number 7th best overall player in the nation. All throughout his life, from the age of 5 years old to 20 years old, he was the top G. He was the man. And then boom, what happens as a 22, 23-year-old? He's irrelevant. Nobody cares about him, and he's facing a midlife crisis. He stated in the video, I think he's like 29 or 30 now. He doesn't even know what he wants to do in life. Fortunately, Christian Hackenberg's got a good head on his shoulders, but it's weird. Imagine people worshiping the ground you walk on. Everywhere you go, people are taking pictures with you for 15 years straight, and then out of nowhere, people could care less about you. For some people, it may not be that big of a deal, but you got to assume your self-esteem, it drops mightily because you're like, well, dang. Everybody forgot about me. I'm a nobody. Life sucks. Getting back on track here, though, with Colt Brennan, This is one of the very few stories that actually had me dang near tearing up, and it got me emotional. The way everything went down, it got to a point where I felt like it, and this is my opinion, you can differ from this. I don't think he could control it anymore. I don't think he could control himself. He was spiraling out of control, and I always think about this. At one point in time, or not even one point in time, no, that's somebody's son. That's somebody's kid. I hate this story ended the way it did, but I also do want to address this before we end out the video. A lot of people chalk up his decision making after 2010 due to the car wreck, which is totally fine and acceptable. There's a great alibi there. And I do believe the car wreck had affected him a ton and it made him act on impulse. But I don't think you can 100% blame it on that, because remember, he did that thing in the dorm at Colorado in 2004. That was way before the car wreck. And although after the car wreck, that's when he started drinking and getting into drugs and whatnot, but the point is, he did a bad thing before it. And I know what you're sitting there saying, Matt. What are you trying to tell me, buddy? What are you trying to say? Well, here's what I'm trying to say, and here's my conclusion on all of this. I think Colt Brennan, he had his problems like anybody else did. And he made a mistake at Colorado, and that was the only mistake, at least I saw of when I was doing my research for this video, before the car wreck. And I think after the car wreck, it enhanced his bad decision-making abilities. And then you got to put the cherry on top of things. His football career, it was diminishing right in front of his eyes. I'm chalking it up to as a combination of a guy who went haywire and he couldn't control himself. Am I going to sit up here and say, oh yeah, this guy's a bad person? No, because I don't do that in these videos, and I don't think I'm in the shoes to label somebody as a bad person. The only thing I've ever did in these videos, and I will continue to do these in these videos moving forward, is number one, present you the facts, and number two, I'll give you my opinions on what happened. And the reason I don't like saying someone's a bad person is because I've always had this mentality, and I do have empathy for people that mess up in this life. I do think there's bad people on this earth, don't get me wrong, but I think 98% of people that do bad things, they're not a bad person, they just make bad mistakes. And I've learned, not through myself, but through some people I went to high school with, just watching them fall flat on their face, that when you make one bad mistake, it's easy to compound that and make another and another, and you're spiraling out of control. And sadly, that's what happened here. There's not too much more to say. RIP Colt Brennan, and thank you for all the great memories in college football. Let me know your thoughts down below. But Roman.